Okay, I think we are live. Hello, everybody. Hello. Let me know if you can see me and hear me. Welcome back to Office Hours, SerenityOS Office Hours. And it's been another week, so we're going to do what we always do and take questions and just looking to see that somebody reacts that I'm here. I have it set to low latency, which I would expect to see. Okay, we're good. Cool. Great. Everybody is here. So, welcome back to Office Hours, and hope everybody had a good week. And we are going to do what we always do and take questions. So while we wait for somebody to chime in with the first question, we are just going to take a look at a random thing that I worked on this week, which was the new settings application. So in the system menu here, you can hit settings, and it now opens up this little app that just has the three types of settings we currently have in the system. And it replaces what was previously a submenu here of the system menu. And the idea is that we will have a place to collect various system settings. So I think that's going to be pretty nice. Just earlier today, we were having kind of a small discussion about maybe exposing application settings through this interface as well. But nothing is entirely clear about where to go with that. But I kind of like the idea of having not just system settings, but also application settings accessible through a settings application, sort of like iOS, right? Anyway, hello everybody, welcome. I did forget to post this in the Discord content channel. Maybe Linus can take care of that. Yeah, so apparently there's a bit of a latency, not low latency according to some people, 12 seconds. That's not great. So it offers me normal latency, low latency, and ultra low latency. But it warns me if I try to use the ultra low latency setting and says that you may lose quality if you use that setting. So it seems like that's not really worth it. All right, Helga here with a very good question. So Helga says, what is a large subproject that you are excited about but have not worked on or started on yet? That's a really good question because I was just looking at two potential subprojects this morning of things to maybe start on. And the first one is, I guess, is sort of about settings. So really like improving the way we do settings in the system. And right now it's extremely ad hoc. Like every application sort of manages its own settings files, and it's not very universally controlled. And making a good common API for settings and then having the ability to edit settings globally somehow would allow us to do a lot of interesting things. So just beefing up the settings system in general is one of the subprojects, which I guess like it technically has been worked on a little bit, but it's so minimal that I would consider it not really explored. And another thing is the way that we bundle things in the file system. So currently, if we go to the res directory here in the root, we have a lot of application-specific assets. Like in the graphics directory, we have like these random graphics assets. Like this icon here belongs to the mouse settings, for example. So if I open mouse settings, it has a little icon for the scroll wheel. And this just lives in a random location in /res graphics. And I would like to have, I guess, some way to bundle assets with their application instead of having to stash them in global places. So one option that that we talked about a little bit this morning was sort of macOS style application bundles, where an application would be, instead of just an executable, it would be a directory that the desktop treats as a single unit, but it's able to contain multiple resources. So that's an option. And then elf embedding is another option. That's what we already do for the application icon, for example. It's just embedded into the elf. So I guess those are two things that I am kind of a little bit excited about and maybe about to start on. Maybe you were looking for some larger thing, but to me these things are large because they will require like a lot of large rethinking of how many things work. Let's see. Don't think we need 60 FPS for office hours. I don't know about that. It's good to have 60 FIPS. Typhoon says, longtime fan, first time catching you live. Well, welcome to the stream. Good to have you here. Greenstone Movies says, what I love about macOS is that it has command comma to access settings in any application. I like that as well. And actually, that's the third big thing I might like to work on, which is to create a better architecture for universal shortcuts. The way that we currently get consistent shortcuts in most of our applications is that we have this thing called common actions, which lives in action.h in GUI. And we have all these helper functions here that to like make an open action or a save action, save as, all the common stuff. And this gives you like a system consistent keyboard shortcut, but it would be even cooler if those shortcuts were sort of globally discoverable and globally editable somehow. And that would include a setting to access the settings. Oh, let me resize this window here a little bit, make things nice and snug. Let's see. Pelle Reimesh says, is settings a directory, a special directory, or a regular program? So settings right now is a program, but it gets its information from the application database. So these AF files and res apps, for example, display settings has a file here, and it looks for anything with the category settings. So any installed application with the settings category will show up in the settings application. So that's how you get things in there. That's how it finds its stuff. Let's see. Miles says, most difficult to resolve or obscure bug you have encountered whilst developing Serenity. So a lot of the most difficult bugs so far have been kernel bugs, I would have to say. And especially weird things that happen when you fork a process and then you have two processes that share memory, and it's supposed to copy on write in both the parent and the child if anybody tries to change the shared memory. But we've had situations where that didn't happen because of bugs, and those bugs can be incredibly difficult to track down because you usually expect stuff like, well, if I overwrite the stack in my forked child process, obviously that's not going to show up in the parent process, but if it does, you will get some very surprising behavior. So those have been very, very difficult to track down. And actually today I'm still working on copy on write related problem. Let's see. Mark says, is there anything you plan for SerenityOS that makes it unique in terms of functionality / behavior related to other operating systems? I don't know. Like, I don't really have a plan in terms of functionality or behavior. I'm a big fan of taking like time-tested, battle-tested abstractions and just reusing them. So I am not necessarily interested in like making things unique just for the sake of making them unique. I am much more interested in building something that you can expect to work pretty well because it's made of things that are known to work really well. Let's see. Owner says, does Serenity support dual display support? Yes, it does. Let's see if we can test it right now. I haven't tested it for a while, but let's test it. Let's do 3 screens. I think this is how you do it. Oh, wait, I didn't get any more screens. Or did I? Nope. Okay. Something about that is not working right. It's like it creates them and then they go away. So we do have dual screen support, but development is ongoing, and the way that I'm used to starting and booting in that way doesn't work. So it's something that we have to look into, or somebody has to tell me how to boot it if it's not the Serenity screens variable anymore. Saintvit says, hey Andreas, what is your philosophy on earning huge money in tech versus genuinely loving what you do? Why did you leave Apple? I bet they paid well. So, yeah, they paid really well. Very, very well, sure. Just like most companies in that area. But I left because, I mean, there was multiple reasons, but the main reason I left was because the company and the environment was becoming overly political, and I am not personally interested in participating in that. And I saw my coworkers slipping into spending more time on Twitter arguing about politics than they were on programming, and I had to get out of that. So I do think that it's more important to genuinely love what you do, and I certainly found a line that I draw where the money is not worth being in big tech. Let's see. Falk David says, do you think Blender could be ported to Serenity? Sure. I guess so. Could probably do that. Let's see. Mercedes Mest says, hi Andreas, I'm super excited because this is the first time I'm watching Office Hours live. Love how Serenity is progressing and hope I'll be able to contribute in the future. And he has a quick question. What does the power user accessibility of late 2000s Unix mean? So you were not involved in the scene around that time? So when I talk about the late 2000s Unix, I'm usually referring to how it was this time just before configuration files and stuff like that stopped being human editable, human readable. Today, a lot of configuration is, I would say, like not super accessible to me. So if I go in like my .config directory on my Linux system, it's full of stuff that I don't understand and I don't know how to edit. And in the late 2000s, you could usually look at the config files in your home directory, all the .files, and there was this feeling, very strong feeling, that you could make sense of those files, even though you have to like open each one and learn it as a separate language sometimes, but you could still sort of make sense of it. And that's something I want to have in Serenity again, this feeling that the config files and the system is human understandable and human readable and human editable. So if you don't want to use the GUI to edit settings, for example, you don't have to. We just provide the GUI as a convenience layer on top of all the editable stuff. So yeah, that's sort of what I mean by power user accessibility, like the fact that you can power user your way through all the config files and stuff. See, Mehdi says, how application data is stored in Serenity? Does it use SQLite or something like that? So application data is stored in any way that the application feels like, and it's not consistent. There's no consistent story, and it's a problem. And a SQLite database system, something like SQLite, is currently in development. We have libsql, which Jan is working on, but oh wait, hold on. Screens. Let me just get rid of that. But applications are sort of left to their own devices when it comes to where to store stuff. So for example, we have, if we go in .config here, we have like bookmarks, browser bookmarks are in config bookmarks.json. And as you can see, it's human editable, human understandable for sure, but it's not ideal, right? Because it's kind of just sitting there with a random hard-coded file name, and nothing says that this belongs to browser. So this is also something that will be part of the greater settings architectural story to improve. Maybe add some sort of some hierarchical structure to it. Rishab says, Mr. Kling, if you could add a startup or shutdown sound to Serenity, what would it be? It would probably be silence, because I boot and shut down Serenity probably like hundreds of times every day, and if I had to listen to a sound every time, I would go a little bit crazy. So let's see. Mustafa says, if you could have one magical 2x speedup in any part of Serenity, which part would it be? That's a fantastic question. If I could get a magical 2x speedup. I don't know. Like, I guess I would have to pick something that, because I enjoy making speedups myself, so I would pick something where I feel like I wouldn't enjoy the work, the optimization work as much myself. Because like, it's tempting to say something like the JavaScript engine, but at the same time, I would rather do the work myself to get that 2x speedup. So if I could get a 2x speedup right now in any part, maybe it would be in the performance of the PNG decoder. So like loading all the images in the system. I bet it could be twice as fast, and it's not something I particularly want to work on right now. So I guess I would love it if somebody showed up and made it twice as fast. But really, I just feel like I had to pick something because you asked the interesting question. Dither8 says, do you take any inspiration from haiku? Not really. Not on a UI or architectural level. Perhaps on a spiritual level of like, I think that spiritually what they do is similar to what we do, which is they sort of go back in time to where BOS existed, and then they extrapolate the BOS paradigm into a new timeline, and then sort of continue iterating on that today with modern technology. I take inspiration from that, I suppose, but I don't necessarily draw on anything that haiku does sort of in band or whatever. Somebody whose name I cannot pronounce, I'm sorry, asks, what do I do for a living? And this is a great opportunity for me to bring up the FAQ. So the FAQ is the thing that you see down in the bottom of the screen, also in the pinned chat message. And it's on my GitHub, GitHub.io. And if somebody asks me, what do I do for a living? What is my job? I am working on SerenityOS full-time as of May, so almost exactly 2 months ago. I'm working on Serenity, so I do this full-time. And you can read my blog post about it if you find that interesting. Let's see, Kosikers says, hey Hakeling, what are some of the implementations of sockets you have used so far on Serenity? Just off the top of your head. Okay, I'm not exactly sure what you mean by that, but the types of sockets we have implemented so far are IPv4 sockets, raw sockets for ping, and local, like, Unix domain sockets. Let's see, Fernando says, do you think SerenityOS will be ported to work with ARM computers? If somebody does it, then yes. Let's see. Quinlan Fab says, hello, just joined the stream and I want to ask you what you would recommend to new operating system developers and some of the mistakes you have made along your journey as an operating system developer yourself. Well, what I would recommend to new operating system developers is to not pay too much attention to what other people think an operating system is and build your own idea and understanding of what you want to do. Because at least for me, I end up in a lot of discussions, or I used to end up in discussions where people would insist that an operating system is a kernel and everything else is not the operating system. And I just don't agree with that. And it's difficult to have a discussion with people who insist that they are right about this. And I think one of my mistakes that I made was earlier I tried to talk with people and justify why Serenity was like one big cohesive thing instead of trying to build only a kernel or only a desktop environment. And after I stopped doing that, it's been a lot nicer because it was a huge waste of time. The operating system development community, just like every other programming community basically, is full of people who have a lot of opinions and don't do a lot of programming themselves. And the sooner you realize that you don't have to care about what they think about your project, the better. So Yuval says, why was your status, this is, what is it called? Well, it's a man with two young boys on Discord yesterday. It was because I was hanging out with my two little nephews. So I was having my two of my three nephews over in town yesterday. And I'm going to see them again today after the stream. Let's see. Der Neuer says, what do you think about virtual reality and augmented reality? How would a virtual environment look like in SerenityOS? So SerenityOS already has virtual environments. You can just click down here to switch to a different one. So if I have my file manager here and I just switch to this totally different virtual reality and I put a text editor here instead, I can just switch between them. Pretty sure that's not what you mean, but I still like virtual desktops. But more seriously about VR and AR and stuff like that, I think it's not something that interests me at all, basically. We had, what was it called? The Oculus dev kit. Like, we got one of the first dev kits back in, I don't know, 2014, I think it was, and tried it out a bit, but it didn't appeal to me. And I can see some applications for AR, but I don't necessarily imagine that they fit into anything I want to do with Serenity. Now, that doesn't mean that that there isn't something great that you could do with that. It's just that I don't personally see a vector for sort of combining them. But if somebody does, I would love to hear about it. Ajwad says, also wanted to ask, what are your thoughts on Mozilla Foundation's handling of Firefox and Servo? So I don't have a lot of insight into the Mozilla Foundation, but I think it's unfortunate that they, at least from the outside, it appears that they are trying to make money and not necessarily spend it on the things that I prefer that they spend the money on, which would be developing good software and keeping browser engine diversity a real thing. I think the fact that they are selling like VPN services and stuff like that is a sad state of things, but I don't know enough about the inside of the organization to understand what's really going on there. Orochikaku said, what did you do between 2017 and 2021? A lot of things. Some of them personal, some of them public. You can see everything public on GitHub. Benjamin with the super chat, $100. That's so much. Thank you. Thanks for being awesome, Andreas. Dude, thank you, Benjamin, for the super chat. That is fantastic. I really appreciate that. Thank you. Let's see. Ayub says, when a program tries to write to a const memory, the program will crash. Why the OS sends segav instead of ignoring the request? So the question is, why does the operating system send a segmentation fault instead of ignoring an attempt to write to read-only memory? Because the program is violating a contract with the kernel. So the job of the kernel, the kernel has a bunch of jobs, but one of the main jobs of the kernel is to restrict what user space can do. So user space programs operate within a set of constraints that are enforced by the kernel. And one thing that user space is not allowed to do is write to read-only memory. That's why it exists. If it were able to do that, or if the kernel would just ignore it, then there would be no point to having read-only memory. Although if you make the question, if the question is about like, why isn't there such a thing as memory that you can write to, but the writes just go nowhere, so they are not reflected in the actual memory, that I don't know, I guess because it's not a particularly useful feature. Connor says, what is one of the favorite things that you've worked on in Serenity in recent months? Ooh, that's a good question. I've worked on so many little things. I guess one of my favorite things in recent months. I think probably the thing where we flash the screen. So this command that makes the screen flash yellow when something is being repainted, which is going to make the screen flashy now. So if you don't like that, just look away for 10 seconds. So this thing right here, which whenever something is repainted, we make a green or yellow rectangle on it first. It has been super duper helpful for finding unnecessary screen updates, and a bunch of people have picked it up and used it to remove unnecessary screen updates in various applications. And I think it was a tiny thing, but it just it's been really, really cool to see other people use it. And yeah, that's probably actually my favorite thing recently. Let's see. DevZero says, will try to make a JIT compiler for JavaScript engine. Maybe we would do a JIT. I am a little bit reluctant to over-engineer, and it does seem to me that it's irresponsible to try to build a JIT when we don't yet have like a correctly functioning JavaScript engine. But when we're at a place where we have a correctly functioning engine and it is now bottlenecking on real-world content in problems that are not solvable at the interpreter or bytecode interpreter level, then maybe that's something to consider. But I have changed my opinion on jitting a little bit since the system development started. Because originally I thought I didn't want to do any kind of jitting, but the more I thought about it, I realized that if the system had a shared system for jitting and sort of a way for any application that has some task that it wants to do, that it could describe that in a lower level language that would then be jitted in a sort of responsible sandboxed way, for example, then that might be something interesting. But building a bespoke JIT only for the JavaScript engine, I feel like that's less something I want to do. Let's see. Max Adbeck says, hi, how hard is it to develop a browser in C++, and how do you compare it to OS development? Do you think it's a good start to learn C++ by contributing to Serenity? So how hard is it to develop a browser engine? It's a lot of work. I wouldn't necessarily say that it's hard because there's a lot of reference material. The specs, the web specs are incredibly good. So if you are already strong in C++ and you can read specs and translate specs into code, then I think you can probably build a browser, but it will take a long time. I probably wouldn't recommend developing a browser engine to anybody who has less than 5 years of like active programming, because it is a broad topic, but at the same time, like, anybody can try. The great thing about difficult or like large programming tasks is that you can still approach them when you're less experienced. It will just take you longer and you will struggle more, but you can still approach them. And do I think it's a good start to learn C++ in Serenity? Yes, I do. If you are past the beginner stage, then you can absolutely learn C++ by contributing to Serenity. If you have more than 1 or 2 years of active programming in any language, you can learn C++ here. But if you're less experienced than that, I would recommend just learning programming first. Let's see, Saint Vid says, I'm not Benjamin, but also wanted to say thank you. Thank you, Saint Vid, for the super chat. That's awesome too. It's Canadian dollars? Cool. Oops. What am I doing? Let's see. FFS Ray says, how many programming languages are supported in Serenity as of today? So if you're talking about Serenity proper and none of the ports installed, then we have, and it also depends on what you consider programming languages, but we do have JavaScript, of course, and we support HTML, CSS, and we have a C++ lexer and partial parser, but we can't compile it or anything, but we can comprehend some of it. And we have a shell that has its own shell language. But then you can also install ports to get stuff like Python and Lua and a handful of languages. And I think just the other day, the V language announced on Twitter that they now support Serenity. Is it VLang? That's not the V language. V language. Victoria Lang, the language. Oh, V language, all right. Yeah, so they said that they support SerenityOS and Haiku. But more importantly, SerenityOS, which, that's nice, like, officially announced. So that's interesting. Let's see, Manas says, I want to know about how GUI updates dirty rectangles from applications to Windows Server in Serenity, and do you use hardware acceleration for mouse cursor? We don't use hardware acceleration for the mouse cursor. It might be nice to detect if that's available and then use it, but it's not something that we currently do. And how the GUI updates dirty rectangles from applications to Windows Server. Okay, so let's see. Let's look at that. I'm just gonna look at this super chat here before I forget. From Mustafa saying, jumping on to the thank you train, learned a lot from your videos. That's awesome. Thank you, Mustafa. Also from Canadian Dollar Town. I'm really glad to hear that you learned from the videos. So let's look at how dirty rectangles go from apps to the Windows Server. So when a window in a GUI application wants to repaint itself, usually that happens because one of its widgets wants to repaint itself. And when a widget needs to be repainted, somebody will call update on that widget, or even update passing in a rectangle, which is just a part of the widget that needs to be updated, because sometimes you don't need to repaint the entire widget. But basically, update just forwards to update with a rectangle, passing the full rectangle of the widget. And then what happens here is that widget updates are really just translated into window updates, because Windows Server doesn't know anything about widgets. From the Windows Server's perspective, there are just a bunch of windows that sit around in 2D space, or 3D space if you consider the stacking behavior. So we figure out what are the coordinates of this widget updated rectangle in window coordinates, and then we tell window to update. And then what window does is that it gathers up all of these rectangles that it has been told, so that we don't send them immediately, but we sort of collect them in case there's very often in GUI code you have like a bunch of different widgets getting updated at the same time. So in order to be more efficient and not like do 1,000 repaints, if 1,000 widgets want to be updated, we just coalesce those into a single multi-rectangle paint request. And once we have done that, so you can see that what we're doing here is we're just appending the updated rectangle to a set of pending paint event rects. And then we do a deferred invocation if for the first time you add a rectangle. Then we do a deferred invocation, which takes all of the ones that we have collected and sends them using the invalidate rect IPC call to Windows Server. So that's how they get sent over there. And then on the Windows Server side, there's a whole other story about how it collects all of the dirty rectangles and so on. But this is how they get sent from the client side, or how they get collected and coalesced and sent. Let's see. Pedro says, "Hey Andreas, greets from Brazil. I'm not a dev nor engineer, but I love to watch your videos. I want to study more about dev in general. Do you recommend where to start?" If you want to study programming, I am not really the right person to tell you where to start, because I haven't been a beginner for 20 plus years, so I'm not in tune with the best way to do beginner stuff. But it is my intuition that you can start basically anywhere, and as long as you do a bunch of programming yourself, then you're going to be fine, because at least it was my experience that I learned a lot more by just trying to make stuff with the skills that I currently have, and then when I hit a wall, I try to learn more. So I would say don't worry so much about what to study or where, just study anything and then try to make stuff and grow that way. Mehdi says, "What are the things I should learn before getting into operating system development?" You should learn programming before you get into that. And then you should have a very clear idea of what an operating system does. Once you know that, then you are ready. Alex says, "I'm curious what kernel call you would expect takes the longest time. I guess it could potentially be used to lock up the system." So there are a whole bunch of kernel calls that can take an infinite time, right? if you, for example, try to do anything that's blocking, right? Or say that you just sleep for 10 years, that is going to take 10 years. But if you're talking about stuff that like actively runs on CPU in the kernel, that's something that comes up when you're profiling. Then you can sort of discover that some system calls do end up churning a lot of CPU in kernel. And certainly on our system, one of the heavy things that you see in profiles of the kernel is memory allocation. The kernel memory allocator is very CPU heavy at the moment. But even so, like the system still has a preemptive scheduler. So even if somebody's taking a long time in the kernel, most of the time they should not be in a critical section where they cannot be interrupted and preempted so that another thread can run. Now that's something where we're not excellent at that. We can definitely get better. But even if you're doing something really busy in the kernel, we should eventually allow other threads to run. Otherwise, that's a bug. Jagger says, contributing to Serenity is an excellent way to learn good Git/large repo practices. I learned more here than any past jobs in school. That's really great, and I'm really glad to hear that. And I know that we have fairly strict practices in the Serenity project when it comes to like how you structure your Git commits and how you present and argue for your code and things like this. But I think ultimately it's something that we have to do if you want to do a project of this scale, of this ambition, and not screw it up. We have to take it very seriously. And I'm really glad that people, through working on Serenity, I heard from hundreds of people actually that they say that that they really appreciate the way that we work in Serenity because it makes them appreciate the value of well-organized Git commits and a well-structured code base and things like that. Okay, so Ralph says, I see you used the app icons as PNG. Why not bitmap? I don't know. Why not PNG? Mustafa says, Serenity has some cool internal things such as badge, etc. What's your most favorite one that most people may not know about? So one of my favorite data structure recently is probably intrusive list. And it was I think Robin added it originally like a long time ago, and then a bunch of people have iterated on it. And it's basically a linked list, but it has no storage of its own. So it does not heap allocate to create nodes. So it has a little bit of storage of its own, of course, where it keeps like the head pointer, but the next and previous pointers, they live in the objects themselves. So like everybody who wants to be in an intrusive list, they have to put like a little storage node on themselves. So for example, in the kernel, we have this virtual memory region object, and it has two intrusive list nodes actually, because it can be on two separate lists. And intrusive list is awesome because very often when you're writing kernel code, you are not really able to allocate because if allocation would fail, there's nothing you can do. So you have to find ways to avoid allocating. And intrusive lists are just amazing for that, because if you have two objects and you want to put those on a list, that's not going to allocate if the list is intrusive, because you're just updating the next and previous pointers that are in those objects already. There's no additional space needed. So something that I've been doing a bunch of lately, and Brian has been doing even more of lately, is converting a bunch of kernel code to use intrusive list. And it just removes the possibility of allocation failure from entire code paths. And that's super awesome for improving our behavior and robustness in face of out-of-memory conditions. Let's see. Patrick says, how do you deal with contributors steering Serenity into a direction that you do not like but is not objectively wrong? UI stuff, etc. I just tell people that this looks bad and we have to change it, or I change it myself. But I do not tolerate people making the system ugly. Certainly not parts of the system that are very easy to see. It's something that I feel very strongly about, and I think if somebody wants to work on UI in the system, it is basically a requirement that they care about UI design. Otherwise, they should work on other parts of the system. I don't think I'm the only person who cares about the UI looking good. And I'm really happy when I see other people put in the time and the effort to improve little inconsistencies and stuff. Like just yesterday, I think it was yesterday, I merged a PR that had a handful of patches, like fixing little margins that were off by 1 and stuff like that. And it's really, really good to see. But generally, like if somebody tries to steer the project in a direction that I don't agree with, then I just say I don't agree with this. We have to do it differently. So it's pretty simple. Let's see. Hadrian says, hi Andreas, you said in one of your videos that you will need to develop virtualization software in order to use Serenity as your main OS. How do you start a virtualization software from scratch? I'm not really sure. I mean, I know how to build an emulator from scratch, but I have never done a accelerated virtualization software before, or a hypervisor or whatever. But I imagine that I would just open up the Intel manual and see what they say about how the virtualization system on the CPU works, and then write some code that creates a very simple VM and take it from there. I don't know. It's like, how do you start anything from scratch? Like, you find reference information about it and then make something simple that you can see it working, and then you iterate. Burner says, why are pledge and unveil opt-in rather than opt-out? So they're opt-in because it just makes it immediately work with any application with without breaking anything. So if they had been opt-out, then all of the ports that we have for the system, we would require to patch them to make sure that they opt out of pledge, for example. And the way it works right now, by the way, pledge and unveil are both APIs that we have inherited from OpenBSD, or sort of not inherited, but we've taken them from OpenBSD and modified them a little bit to fit our own case. And the way that they work in OpenBSD is the same way they work here. So in OpenBSD, they are opt-in, and we keep them opt-in as well, so that they are essentially compatible. Let me do that. And I quite like that design, I guess. And I don't know what you would do if you want to opt out, how that would work exactly. Like, what is the value in forcing people to opt out explicitly as opposed to just not calling pledge? Let's see. Meep says, hey Andreas, I see that you are a Brave verified creator. Is that actually you? It would be nice if I could support you this way. Yes, somebody or a bunch of people asked me to verify myself on that platform so that I could receive support, and yes, that is actually me. Although I have to admit, I haven't looked at it for a long time, so I guess I should go and check that out. Maybe I am filthy rich on there, although I don't expect that. Let's see. Now, CDPC says, now that you mention it, fallocate has terrible performance issues in Serenity, which makes the system unresponsive, and it might be for that very reason. F-allocate. Do we have F-allocate? What is F-allocate? We don't have anything called F-allocate. That's some Linux thing. We don't have F-allocate, so I don't know what you're talking about. Oh, Tim with the super chat. Hello, Andreas. Hope you are well. I am well. Thank you, Tim. Both for the well wishes and for the super chat. I hope you are well too. I just saw your YouTube short earlier today. Tim is on YouTube doing programming language videos. Definitely something that everybody should check out. If you like my videos, you are going to like Tim's videos as well. I will link Tim's channel in the chat. And let's see. Mustafa says the Linux kernel's internal doubly linked list structure also works the same way as intrusive lists. Yes, I imagine so. I think basically all kernels use intrusive linked lists because it's just the most awesome data structure for kernel code. Burner says, would you be interested to release your videos in other platforms? Not really, unless there's like a compelling reason for why I should do that. Because I don't really have any problem with YouTube, so I don't know what I would gain by going somewhere else. Let's see. Oh, wait, Andres says, am I the only one that cannot hear any audio? And then nobody responds to him. So maybe nobody could hear him asking. Hopefully everybody can hear the audio. I can see the audio going out in OBS, but since nobody else said anything, I imagine that it probably is working for most people. Let's see. Mercedes Mest says, one of my favorite series is the code review series. How do you divide your time between reviewing code and implementing something new? Shout out to Linus, who I know helps in this task. So first thing I want to mention is everybody is invited to help out with code review. If you see anything in the review queue on GitHub, let's go to Serenity. If you see anything in the review queue here that sounds interesting to you or that you might be an expert on, you're cordially invited to provide feedback on all pull requests. But to the question on how do I divide my time between reviewing code and implementing something, I always remind myself to review code. I used to have GitHub notifications turned on, but at some point it just became impossible. So nowadays I sort of have it a couple of times during the day when I go to the review queue and I try to get 2 or 3 pull requests reviewed. Just pick them at random from the first page. And other than that, we have the code review channel on Discord. And if you're not on the Serenity Discord, you should definitely join it. It's discord.gg/SerenityOS. And we have a code review channel on there where everybody is invited and encouraged to advertise their pull requests so that people learn about them and can give feedback. And if I see something in there that somebody's asking for help with, and like I'm at the right headspace at that moment, then I usually go and look at that as well. Let's see. Govinda says, what are the ways to debug Serenity code? I believe cline breakpoint won't work as we're using Ninja to run the project. Let's say I want to debug internal working of McDeer. Right. So there are a handful of different ways to debug. Obviously, you cannot easily use cline's integrated debugger because we are running in a virtual machine that does not expose sort of a debug server for internal programs running in that kernel. You can debug the kernel itself in Serenity by connecting to it with GDB. But if you want to debug programs in Serenity, you have to use in Serenity tools. And one such tool that we have is the Serenity debugger, which you can run with any program. And it's quite limited in its capabilities. But if somebody discovers that it's so limited and they really want it to have more capabilities, then they could add those capabilities. It's using a library for debugging, so the same functionality is ideally or should be exposed through the Hack Studio IDE. Although I don't know that anyone has worked extensively on the debugger recently, but I don't think it's broken either. There's definitely a lot of room to improve that. Personally, I'm not a huge debugger user. I tend to use like Printf debugging for most of my work. Andrew says, you're obviously inspired by Windows 95. Did you use that heavily in the 90s? Ever used Windows NT? I have been playing with NT4 and it's really a lovely OS. Yeah, I did use Windows 95 extensively, and also 98, ME, 2000, XP, and my mom had a laptop with NT4 for a few years, which I also used a lot. And I remember liking NT4, although it was frustrating that it looked and felt like Windows 95, which is what sort of my classmates had, but I couldn't play the games I would get from my classmates because they wouldn't run on NT. And it didn't really make sense to me at the time because I didn't understand that NT was a different kernel, and that's why I couldn't run Windows 95 games. But it is a cool OS for sure. So CDPC says, I'm sorry, I meant Ftruncate. Right, so you're talking about Ftruncate instead of fallocate. Sure. So Ftruncate we do have, and what Ftruncate does is it takes a file descriptor and a size, and then it resizes the file represented by the file descriptor to whatever size you tell it. So you can like open a new file and say Ftruncate to 1 gigabyte, and then the kernel reallocates the storage for that file so that it's 1 gigabyte large. And that's definitely slow in Serenity for, at least for the ext2 file system probably, but also for tempfs it should be fast because we just do a memory allocation to accommodate the size you ask for. But truncation is implemented by the inode classes. So we have inode resize. Or no, wait, that's not what I'm looking for. It's truncate, yes. So every inode can implement a truncate virtual override function, and then it's up to the inode to resize itself. So if you find that, for example, the ext2 truncate function is slow, then you can go here into resize, which is probably the workhorse, and investigate why that might be slow. I imagine that we are probably doing something stupid and inefficient. Like, I don't know. I mean, you will have to investigate it yourself. I don't want to speculate because it will be likely wrong anyway. Mustafa says, I like the attention these super chats get me. Yes, it certainly does work. And Alex with the awesome smiley face. Thank you, Alex and Mustafa, for the super chats. Let's see. Oh, and Mustafa saying hi to Tim with the super chat. That's weird, but cool. Miyoyo says, any security feature you're thinking of implementing? I don't have any, well, I have one security feature I would like to implement, which is probably to further segregate web content. So we already have process per tab, but the state-of-the-art major engines are all moved to process per security origin. So I do think that that's something we should do as well. And I think doing that would force us to also clean up our window object and window proxy implementation, because there's a little bit of work in proxying JavaScript requests across origin if they live in different processes. So that's definitely something that I would like to implement in browser and libweb, but I don't necessarily have any like system-wide security features that I want to do right now. I know Gunnar is currently working on kernel ASLR, KSLR, and it's almost finished. And as far as I know, or at least it sounds like it's almost finished. I shouldn't overpromise on somebody's behalf. And then we should also expand the address space on in user space on 64-bit, because we're not using, I think we only use addresses up to the 8 GB mark, despite having a 64-bit address space. So that's definitely something that we could improve to improve the value of ASLR in user space. Man, security features. I haven't thought about doing security features for a while. There's a whole bunch of awesome stuff we could do. Certainly like malloc hardening is something. Our malloc is not hardened really. It has some very, very basic sort of sanity checks, but there's so much we could do, like deferred free and randomization and poisoning and all kinds of stuff. Checksumming, out of band metadata. A lot of stuff we could do with malloc. Koshevi says, what's the problem of vector besides allocation failure? Well, allocation failure is one problem, but also the fact that you have to allocate in the first place and can make it slow. If you just have to add, if you want to append to a linked list, you're just updating a pointer, right? Or 2 pointers. Whereas if you want to add something to the end of a vector, you may have to reallocate that vector to accommodate the new storage requirement. So linked lists have a lot of nice properties over vectors. The main benefit of vector over linked list is the data locality, because everything is like neatly laid out one after the other in memory, whereas linked lists are disjoint in memory usually. Halfix says, would you ever consider to add at boot something to ask the user to go in GUI or CLI environment? Yeah, maybe we would have something like that. There's already some way to, let's see, I don't remember how to do that anymore, but there is a way to boot in text-only mode. People have been messing a lot with the run scripts lately, so I don't remember how to turn it on in text-only mode right now. Let's see, Yuval says, what do you think about writing a lot of code without compiling and fixing errors and bugs at a later stage? Writing a lot of code without compiling, I love it. I love it so much. It is a fantastic thing to do because it allows you to keep the greater idea of what you're trying to achieve in mind for a longer time. And I think when you're doing architecture work and initial bring-up work of a program, the longer you can stay in that zone where you're just sketching out the big wireframe architecture of your app, it's very, very cool. And because once you start iterating on all the compiler failures, you sort of page out the architecture of what you're doing and you just deal with whatever the compiler throws at you. So I think, at least in my case, like I always feel a lot more productive and in the zone when I go for a long time without compiling. And I learned while working on WebKit, where you have to go for a long time without compiling because compiling is prohibitively expensive. Like at least back when I worked on it, it would take it could take up to 45 seconds or a minute for a single file change to recompile WebKit. Maybe it's faster today, but back when I was working on it, you really had to mean it when you tried to compile. Let's see. Armo says, the resident pastor of the SerenityOS movement is here. Well, hello, Armo, the resident pastor. Good to have you here. Dieter says, will you make more porting videos? Probably. It depends on what kind of ports show up. While I enjoy the process of porting stuff, I don't just want to port random things. Like I only port stuff that I personally want to run. That's why you saw me porting like Git and Diablo and Duke Nukem, because those are things I wanted to run, and Doom, of course. But at the moment, I don't really have any third-party software that I want to run. At least nothing that seems approachable as an open source port at the moment. But if something comes up, then sure. Tim says, I don't get the shame and stigma around Printf debugging. Yeah, it's a weird, like, it's almost like a elitism, I think, from people who use a debugger, who somehow, I mean, most people who use a debugger don't care that you use Printf, but some people who use a debugger, in my experience, look down on Printf for some reason, which is silly. But at the same time, there are probably just as many people who use Printf debugging and are self-conscious about it, because they are the same type of person who would look down on Printf debuggers if they were using a debugger, if that makes sense. I think it's probably more of a personality type than anything. There's no reason to feel shame of however you debug, right? Like, as long as you find the bugs, it really doesn't matter. Let's see. Ganesh says, off-topic question, how is your English so good, despite being from a non-English speaking country? Because I practiced a lot, I think. I mean, I learned English at an early age, and then I just practiced and practiced because I wanted to have good English pronunciation. And I think it's something that everybody who's not a native English speaker can improve their English pronunciation with practice. But I think not many people take that seriously. But you can take it seriously if you want to improve it. But you have to, like, just like anything that you practice, you have to practice actively and make like little exercises for yourself and things like that. Let's see. German WTB says, do you have any worries with the relative flood of pull requests coming in? Not really. It's going to be fine, I think. It's going to be fine. The pull requests are fine. The thing that scares me a little bit is the relative flood of people coming in, because every new person is like a new personality that you have to get to know and learn about, and it's really fun, but it's something that I was not used to doing previously, and it's something that would have terrified me to death when I started. Like, when I put this project on GitHub, if you had told me that there were going to be however many contributors, 461, right? I would have had a minor freak out, because that's not a number of people that I have ever known before in my life, and I wouldn't know what to do with that. But since it's all happening incrementally, I'm sort of able to deal with that. And yeah, let's see. Tim says, they're pretty sure that they teach English from an early age in Sweden. Right, yeah, so I learned it in school when I was 10, but because we had computers at home, my parents had already helped me learn a bunch of English so I could understand the computer. So I learned a lot of English from playing like PC games and using MS-DOS, stuff like that. Mustafa says, how often do you actually experience allocation failure? I don't think I've ever had a single allocation fail in the 4 years I've been programming. If you are in a kernel context, then you can very easily run out of RAM, right? And you have to do something with that. Because it's either when you run out of memory in the kernel, say that you have 4 gigabytes of memory in the system. Maybe you have more, but just for example, right? You have 4 gigs and you have a bunch of programs. Maybe you're running Google Chrome, right? And it has allocated 3.99 gigs and then it wants a bit more. Then what are you going to do? You have to do something, and you can't just panic the kernel. So if you're in user space, you often don't see this type of problem because the kernel is nice enough to hide it from you. Most systems, they will do stuff like compress a bunch of memory to free it up, or they will page it out to a swap file on disk. We don't currently do either of those in Serenity. That's maybe something we should investigate. I'm hesitant to add swap because I feel like swap tends to create a very bad user experience, but compression is certainly interesting. And let's see, what else is a good way to deal with that? Something that is woefully missing in most systems is a way for the kernel to give feedback to user space about the memory situation. And even if it's not missing, like on iOS and macOS, for example, they are pretty good about the kernel informing user space about the overall memory situation on the system. But that doesn't mean that the applications necessarily like respond to that information or adjust their own behavior. But I think from the kernel's perspective, that's definitely something that we want to do in Serenity, just expose more information about like what would be a good idea right now in terms of user space memory allocation behavior. Like, is this a good time to do a lot of caching, or should we hold off? That type of information is really something we want to get from the kernel to user space in order to improve our behavior in low memory situations. Anyways, that's a whole big topic that's very interesting, but I have to I have to move forward here. Let's see. Wool says, how many real life friends do you have? Less than 20, let's say. Magnus asks in Swedish, which transformer is your favorite? It's obviously Optimus Prime. Come on. Let's see. Michael says, trying to use C++ to contribute is a bit daunting. Always have heard the doom and gloom of memory leaks, so worried my contributions would be problematic. So in modern C++, it's pretty hard to induce memory leaks if you just use smart pointers. The main way that you would introduce memory leaks while using smart pointers is by introducing reference cycles. So you have reference pointers into objects that point to each other, and then because they point to each other, then their ref counts never reach 0, and that's usually the memory leak that I see in modern C++ programs. And there's a very clear path to fixing that type of problem by having, one strong reference and one weak reference, so you break the cycle. But it can be tricky to identify those types of leaks because there's no good tooling for it, really. And maybe that's something we should build for Serenity, actually, something for detecting reference counting leaks or cycles. But really, when it comes to memory leaks, it's not something that you need to worry about. If you're programming within Serenity and you're using our smart pointers and everything, then you're going to have other problems, but not really memory leaks are not going to be your main problem. X Programming says, make a video creating a basic kernel for us to see where it comes from. There are so many videos about that already. You don't need me to make one. Armo says, is Serenity catering well for accessibility? No, definitely not. It's not something that we are currently really even thinking about when it comes to how the system is developed or architected. It's something that might be interesting to think about, but it's hard to do because we do everything in Serenity. Everything in Serenity happens because somebody takes an interest in it, right? And unless somebody takes an interest in expanding our accessibility support or improving the architecture to support that, then it's not going to happen by itself. So it is what it is, right? Like things happen when they happen. And it's something that I personally find cool. And I think there is a lot of side benefits that you can get, that everybody can get from having better accessibility architecture. So it might be something that I would eventually work on myself, but I couldn't tell you when that would happen. Angelo says, to add on to the previous question, on allocation failure, what does Serenity do when you're out of memory? Does it have an killer? We don't have an killer because we don't overcommit memory, or we try to only. I think there might be some situation where we still overcommit, but basically we shouldn't allow you to create more processes than we can accommodate. So when you fail allocation, we will instead tell the program that your allocation attempt failed, and then it's up to the program to deal with that situation. Let's see, Kevin says, Valgrind is pretty cool to detect memory leaks, but it's extremely slow. Yeah, Valgrind is great. And we have our own Valgrind alike in Serenity, of course, called the User Space Emulator, or UE for short, which is x86 emulator that I started writing, I don't know, what was it, over a year ago? To sort of have the same functionality as Valgrind on the system. So it catches memory leaks and invalid accesses and stuff like that. Definitely an interesting area that we could improve, certainly in terms of performance, but also like catching more bugs. So this would be an ideal place to insert something like catching reference cycles between reference counted objects. I don't know how you would do it exactly, but there would be some way to do it. Let's see, Nuvandra says, if you would implement a scripting/programming language for Serenity, on which styles would it be inspired? Will you be willing to use functional programming for that? I would use JavaScript because we already have JavaScript. And I think there's no reason to have more languages when we can have one really good JavaScript implementation instead. Like spreading ourselves across multiple languages is a waste of time, in my opinion. And that's sort of how the Serenity project organizes itself in the greater scheme of things as well. Spending a lot of time on multiple competing implementations of whatever makes for a fragmented and an unpleasant desktop. And that's why in Serenity we have like a single graphics library, a single web engine, a single GUI library, single everything, so that everybody can draw from the same pool of functionality and have completely consistent interfaces, completely consistent functionality. And I think JavaScript fits into that we have a strong implementation of a strong scripting language already, and what we should be doing is adapting that to whatever use cases we see for it within the system. At least that's my personal feeling about it. Mustafa says, what one feature would you add, change to CPP if you could, and would make the Serenity codebase nicer? So at the moment, I would love to have the question mark operator from Rust. I think that's really neat. So let's find some code that does something like... so we have a lot of code like this, right? Where we do some operation and get a result back. And then we put that result into a local temporary, check if it's an error, and if it is an error, then we return that thing. And I believe in Rust they have something like, I don't know, is it like it would be something like that or whatever, where you can very easily express the same thing as I do here with just the single question mark, that like do this thing, and if it returns an error, then return that from this function. I would love to have that in C++. I think it would make so much of our code, especially in the kernel, but in many places, so much more readable. But I don't think I can get it, because I asked somebody on the C++ committee, and they said that they don't want to add an operator for that. But who knows? Tim says, gotta run. Hope you all have a great day. I hope you have a great day too, Tim. Thank you for stopping by. Ashish says, do you think Serenity is going to become an operating system that focuses on developers/tinkerers instead of commercial users? Yes, absolutely. At least that's what I'm going to focus on. If somebody were to come along and make the system extremely appealing to commercial users in some way, then I have nothing against that. But as long as it doesn't clash with what we're already trying to do with the system, and it doesn't clash with my goals here. But realistically, I think that it is much more interesting to developers and tinkerers and power users, because it really makes no effort to appeal to regular users or non-technical people. This is almost like a place where we get rest from having to consider non-technical users. Because normally when you do programming, certainly as a job, then you always have to accommodate non-technical people. And it can feel very, very nice and fun to get a break from that and get to write code that doesn't have to appeal to them and can appeal only to power users and ourselves, right? Let's see. Mustafa says, guess it's time to make your own C++ compiler. Maybe. Magnus says, would Serenity be a good OS for working with audio, or is it mainly meant to be safe? I approve whichever. So at the moment, it's definitely not great for audio. We have very limited audio capabilities, but I think if somebody would come along with a great interest in audio and willingness to actually engage with the real problems of like good audio software, like latency and hardware support, stuff like that, then it's not at all unthinkable that we could make a great system for that. But it's not something that anybody is actively working on at the moment. And maybe it's something I would do at some point, because I do find it pretty fun, but I'm just waiting until I get bitten by that curious bug that makes me do things when it comes to audio. I did speak to somebody just a few days ago who expressed some interest in improving audio support in the system, but I speak to a lot of people who express interest in doing things to the system, and 99% of them don't end up doing things. So I don't really read too much into it. Andy says, does Serenity have a spreadsheet app? Of course it does. Ali added a spreadsheet app a while ago called Spreadsheet. And it is a simple spreadsheet, but it does have some interesting features. You can script it with JavaScript. So it's been so long since I used it, so I don't actually remember how to do it, but but it does have some, it has built-in documentation, so you can look up how to use the functions. So this is how we would do that. So range of B1 to B2. Wait, is that modal? That's irritating. Oh my goodness, I can edit that. That's so weird. Why can't I edit it? Okay, that's not right. Something here is very broken. Why can you edit random content? Oh no. I think we've accidentally made all web content editable. That was not supposed to happen. Anyway, we do have a spreadsheet. I have to look into that issue with the web content. And the spreadsheet does have JavaScript. It runs in the JavaScript engine, so you can do various fair set of interesting math functions and stuff, and look into it. And I'll just leave it at that. Let's see. Luke with the super chat. Thank you, Luke. Looking forward to the monthly Serenity update video. Keep up the awesome work and content. Thank you for the super chat, Luke. I'm also looking forward to the monthly update video. It is very stressful, but also my favorite thing every month to look over the changes and share them with everybody. It's really awesome. Let's see. Kleines Filmröschen says, the audio dude might be me. That's not you. At least you didn't tell me anything about that. Tushar says, how usable is the browser? Does it support modern APIs? It's not really usable for anything but test content and simple web pages at the moment. It supports like a handful of random web platform APIs, but not really enough to run any complex website. But it is something that we keep improving on and keep working on. Building a browser that's compatible with the contemporary web is a long-term project, and it's not like inherently hard or impossible or anything like that. Like a lot of people like to say that building a browser is impossible, which is really frustrating because it's not impossible. It's perfectly possible. It just takes a lot of work and a lot of time. It's something that we're doing it the only way that you can, which is to build it one step at a time and one feature at a time. And this page used to look a lot better than this, so somebody has been putting some no juice into the CSS implementation and regressed it, but basically you just have to go incrementally and do a couple of features at a time. And in the browser channel on our Discord server, there's always people talking about stuff that they're working on. The latest thing that's going on is a new CSS parser, which has much better spec compliance than the old one that I wrote. And there's a whole bunch of things that will be fixed by that, and then we can iterate on that and keep improving. It's going to take a while to get the browser to where it should be, but if we just maintain a good attitude and keep iterating, then we are going to get there. It's just a matter of when, not if. Kleines Filmröllchen says, I didn't tell you, but I'm planning to do audio improvements incrementally. Well, that's good. Everything should be improved incrementally. Trying to improve non-incrementally has a tendency to just not really go anywhere. So I'm happy to hear that you want to do audio improvements incrementally. RH Torres says, why don't you use FOSS apps like GIMP or LibreOffice? I don't understand your question. Do you mean why don't I use them in Serenity? It's because we do everything from scratch in Serenity. Kyle says, is there a W3C test suite set up for the CSS and HTML engines? There are a bunch of tests, yes. The W3C has published vast test suites for many of the CSS specifications, and there's no nice, easy way to just run the tests. You have to do a bit of, I don't know, greasing or like elbow greasing to get it to run. But people have been trying to get, I think the current day thing that the W3C works on, or the WattWG, is this thing that they call the Web Platform Test, so WPT. And I know Luke and some other people have been running partial WPT in the Serenity browser. And I think once we can get that to a state where like you could automate running the WPT, the web platform tests, then it would be a lot easier to just do like random fixes here and there, and you would see like if we could get the web engine to the place where libjs is right now, where libjs has a test suite that just runs every time that we commit, and then you can see the number go up of the number of passing tests. If we can get the web platform tests to do this as well, then it will be a lot easier to start just hacking on test compliance and spec compliance for the browser, because it's so motivating when you have a number that goes up. Let's see. Mustafa says, what's the latest and greatest in Pixel Paint? I don't know. I don't think there hasn't been any particular work in Pixel Paint recently, I think. What was the last thing we did in Pixel Paint? Some crash fix, modifiers. So I guess the last thing I worked on in Pixel Paint was paint invalidation, so that when you paint, I'm going to turn the flashy thing on again, just warning people, it's going to start flashing. So that when you paint, for example, with the pen in Pixel Paint, then you can see that the whole screen doesn't turn yellow. It used to be that it would turn yellow, but I went and made it so that when you're actively drawing, then we only update the area where you draw. And it made it like a lot more responsive, and it feels really good to paint with it now because it never lags. I guess maybe that doesn't come through in the live stream, but it's something I really liked doing. That's the latest and greatest. LP says, watching you code a JS interpreter will definitely be interesting. Dude, I did that like over a year ago. We already have a JS interpreter. It's in the system, and let's see. Yeah, exactly. Exactly, Tushar. BD Brain says, do you think your initial vision for Serenity has been changed by the open source development process? Not really. I think my initial vision is basically unchanged. I wanted a very power user accessible Unix-like system that looks and feels like a 90s office desktop system, and that's what we're building. It's still what we're building. Now, I didn't really expect this many people to get involved, and I didn't expect this many applications to get developed so quickly, but the initial vision is basically completely intact, which is probably unusual for a project like this. It seems to me that adding people has not corrupted or diluted the vision, and everybody, as far as I can tell, everybody understands what it is that we're trying to do. And that I just feel incredibly fortunate that that's what's happening. It would have been very difficult to deal with people coming and trying to pervert the vision or steer it in another direction. Yuval says, do you have some tea beside you? Yes, of course. I have Earl Grey tea right here from Twinings in my SerenityOS cup. From the SerenityOS store, obviously, where you can also pick up these sweet Yak Overflow t-shirts. Anyway, you can definitely do that. Let's see. Conrad says, is it possible to implement JVM on SerenityOS? Possible, probably, if you either port an existing Java virtual machine or implement one from scratch. Welkosh says, is there any vector graphics software in Serenity? Not at the moment. All-Seeing Activity says, it looks Windows 95. Yeah, I mean, it does look a little bit like Windows 95. I agree. I would say it looks more like Windows 2000. But I am a lot more particular about the differences than most people. Let's see. Joao says, will GNU core utils ever be ported to Serenity? And what about GUI libraries like KDE and Qt? I have no idea. If somebody ports them, then they will be ported. Otherwise, they will not be ported. Mustafa says, it's been wanting to work on Serenity for a while, but QEMU is ridiculously slow on Mac, so it's not really fun getting anything going. Might just get a Linux machine soon. Yeah, I mean, Linux is definitely the preferred development environment for Serenity, just because it is so much faster than macOS and Windows. And I don't know why that is, but I have tried it on all three major systems, and Linux is just incredibly faster for the particular things involved in running and developing Serenity. And I definitely recommend using Linux if you can. Magnus says, screensavers, are those still a thing, and do they have a place in Serenity? So we do have screensavers. There's no structure to screensavers at the moment. It would be good to get some structures. At the moment, they just live here in the demos category. So we have the Starfield one, for example. I forget who added it a while ago, but we do have a handful of them, and we also have some things that could be screensavers but are not, like the Fire demo. It might be something to consider. It would be cool if you could, like, we would have a screensaver tab here in the display settings maybe, or even a separate screensaver. I don't know where we would put it exactly, but somewhere. Yeah, it should be a thing. Let's see. Gautam says, would you port to other processors? Maybe. I don't know. Would you? Adam Catchcase says, HTML5 test almost works in the browser. There are 2 failing assertions in the parser. Okay, yeah, so it sounds like we could probably get that working with some effort. Just needs to get some parser fixes. That's good. And let's see, Fabrizio was asking, will Serenity support HolyC? Well, you can port it to Serenity, and then it would work. Moriarty says, why do you have haters? Why do I have haters? I don't know. I have a small group of haters that some of them follow me around on the web and hate on things I do, and I don't know why. and I don't particularly care to know, but I expect that it's just something that happens when you get to a certain audience size. Then some percentage of your audience will be haters for whatever reason, and I absolutely do not take it personally if somebody is a hater, because as the name implies, it is something that they are. It's not something that I am. So it's fine. Be a hater. Dr. Deathbolt says, can you explain how you build network drivers? So the way network drivers work in Serenity, if you're talking about network adapter or network card drivers, so we have a handful of them, and they all inherit from this class called network adapter in the kernel. So the kernel has a network adapter base class with a handful of virtual interface or virtual things that you override. So for example, the simplest network adapter subclass is probably the loopback adapter, which we use to implement the localhost interface. And you can see here that it's really mostly about implementing send raw. And then, this is actually really illustrative of how network devices work, which is good. So essentially, you subclass the network adapter class, and then you implement or override the sendDraw virtual function, which will be called with a data payload whenever somebody in the system wants to send something out on this network device. You get the payload as a byte sequence, and then you do something. And what the loopback adapter does, of course, is just like any loopback adapter, just pretends that whatever was sent out pretends that it was now received. And this is how you receive something. When you receive something from the network device, then you call didReceive, giving it the bytes. So in a driver that actually supports some hardware, like here's our Intel E1000 PCI card driver. So when he receives, when it gets like an interrupt request and we read out data buffers from a network card, then what we do once we have extracted the data that we received, we call didReceive. So didReceive is in the network adapter base class, of course. That's essentially how it works. So what you have to do if you want to support a new card is just subclass network adapter and do whatever you got to do to detect if the specific network adapter is present, of course, and talk to it, initialize buffers, and blah, blah, blah. You can look at the E1000 driver for a pretty good example. I think we also have an NE2000 adapter, which is another old card, but commonly emulated and quite easy to understand. So that's another driver you could look at for inspiration. Let's see. Valgrind says, need a screensaver with flying yaks or yaks stacking on top of each other. Yeah, there's a lot of fun things you could do with screensavers. I think we do need to get the screensavers into some sort of more structured storage system, like instead of just having them be standalone demo apps, if they could live somewhere so that you could select them from a list and stuff. I think it would feel a lot less cluttery to just add screensavers, because right now if you add screensavers, they just take up more space in the application area, and it's something to do. But yeah, that would be a funny screensaver. Juan says, seeing your constant care on the project, keeping it the way it's intended, I think. Great project to follow and be inspired by. Thank you. That's awesome. I definitely do put a lot of constant care into the project. As you can probably tell, I care very deeply about this project and making it the best and most beautiful software that it can be, right? I don't have any higher priority in terms of computer related things I care about. So and sometimes I know that sometimes maybe I can come off a bit harsh, but really I am just protecting the integrity and quality of this project and trying to make sure that it becomes as good as it can be. And I really appreciate that the people do seem to recognize that, and then people are really trying their best to make it the best that it can be as well. And I do feel extremely fortunate to have the support and community of so many people who do care about this. It is an amazing thing and an amazing feeling. So I really do appreciate everybody caring so much about it, I guess. You know. Let's see. Oh, All Seeing Activity says, did you add contact menu shortcuts that allow the user to open with apps or refresh the desktop? So we don't have any context menu shortcut to refresh the desktop because the desktop is automatically refreshed. So if I go to the desktop on the command line and create a new directory, boop, then as you can see, the desktop automatically refreshes. So you don't need to do that manually. Let's see. Kongdang says, I remember when I used Win 2000, I like the fade in out effect. That's one of those effects that I always turn off, or used to turn off when I was using Windows 2000, because I didn't like the thing that you're talking about is like menus fading in and out, right? And to me, it always seemed like that's another 150, 200 milliseconds where I can't use my menu. And I much prefer to just be able to use my menu, I think. Let's see. So Mustafa asks, what is Weakable? Weakable, let me show you. But before I do, let me just say thank you to Saint Vic for the super chat saying, heck haters. Yes, heck the haters. Weakable is a base class that you can inherit from. And basically what it gives you is the ability to create weak pointers. So if you look around the code base for public Weakable, you will find a whole bunch of classes that inherit from it, and it's a CRTP class. So you have to pass in your own name. The class that you're inheriting with has to pass in its own name as a template argument. And this gives you the make weak pointer function. So make weak pointer, which you can then call on the object. And then you get a weak pointer back. And the weak pointer is magical because when the object it points to is destroyed, the weak pointer becomes null. That's the whole thing. So it's really just a convenient way to say, I want to be able to have weak pointers to this object. And let me go somewhere and type out some code. So you would have like a struct foo that is Weakable foo. And now that you have done this, you can create one of these and you can make a weak foo like that. Oh, maybe I have to say foo, is that it? Oh, I have to include weak pointer, sorry. Yeah, so I didn't have to do that, probably. And now, the nice thing here is that when this foo is destroyed, the weak foo will become null. So imagine that I had done this, right? And then delete foo. Normally we don't program like this in Serenity, but weak foo is now null. That's how it works. And Weakable, of course, hides all of the implementation of how the weak pointer actually works. It just hides it from you so that you don't have to deal with it. Let's see, Master says, are you streaming this on SerenityOS? No, I am streaming from Linux. We currently don't have webcam support or hardware encoding, video encoding support on Serenity, so I cannot stream from Serenity. Let's see. Mehdi says, what are the things you like most about Unix? Oh, I like almost everything about Unix. I really like the shell environment and the simplicity of it, and I like the idea of the file descriptor as a universal handle. Yeah, I like a lot of stuff about it. I could have maybe write a longer piece of text about that at some point, but I need to think more about it. Geht dich nichts an? Oh, my German pronunciation is not good. Asks, what is the yak about? So the yak is about yak shaving, which is an expression that we commonly use in the SerenityOS project, but is commonly understood around the world as working on something that seems unrelated to whatever you were trying to achieve originally, but is in fact necessary before you can make progress on the original thing. You can look it up to find some examples. Arthur says, when would you use ref counting versus pointers and references? So when to use ref counting versus raw pointers is when you are defining the ownership model of something. So if you, whenever you are instantiating objects, you're allocating objects, you have to think about who owns this object and what is its lifetime, right? And whoever owns the object normally is responsible for managing its lifetime. And in Serenity, we have two common ways of object ownership, or common models. One is the single owner model, and one is the reference counted multi-owner model. And the single owner model is very simple. You have an object that has a single owner, so when that single owner decides, I no longer need this object, then it makes sure that it gets deleted. And the typical thing that we use for this in Serenity is the onPutter template, which holds a pointer to an object, and when the onPutter goes out of scope, it will delete the object. You can, I think this is how we do it normally. So something like that. And then when the onFoo is assigned null, then it will delete anything that it currently points to. And then you can pass these around, and because it has the smarts to always delete when becoming null, then you know that the object will never leak, because onPutter takes care of it transparently, making sure that it gets deleted. Now, for the situation where you have multiple owners that share ownership of an object, then it's less clear when it should be deleted, right? It should be deleted once nobody needs to point to it anymore. So in order to achieve that, you have to use, I mean, there are a couple of different approaches, but we typically use reference counting, which means that everybody who points to it, they increment a counter on the object, and then when the counter goes to 0 because the last person stopped pointing to it and decremented the counter, then the object is deleted at that point. You can read a lot more about how our smart pointers work in the GitHub repository. If you navigate to documentation, smart pointers, here, then you can find the information I just gave you, plus a lot more with some examples of how to use our smart pointers. Let's see. Yassine says, when you start something from scratch, you seem to know in advance about the type hierarchy of what you're building. Is it the case? You know in advance what's virtual, inherited, etc. So very often I discover what I want to do while I'm building it, but even like the basic type hierarchy is usually pretty obvious, especially when building desktop software, because if you can imagine a desktop application, it's pretty easy to translate that imagination into a C++ class hierarchy, you know, because you have like windows and widgets and toolbars and buttons, and just like you have those, you have sort of abstract things like, you know, like connections and sockets and accounts and settings. And once you get into this object-oriented mindset, it comes pretty naturally, like how to make the classes and hierarchies, and then you just sort of you do this a lot and you get experience doing it, and then you discover that it's actually pretty simple. But I've been doing this for a very long time, so obviously I was a lot worse at this in the past. Let's see. Ilhan says, any experience on Amiga OS? None whatsoever. I have never used Amiga OS. Mustafa says, gotta head out. Was great chatting. Have a great day. Yeah, it was great to have you here, man. I hope to see you next week. Thank you for stopping by. Archetypal says, recently started learning C using the book Modern C. Am I doing the right thing, Andreas? Only you know if you are doing the right thing. If you feel like you're doing the right thing, then you are probably doing the right thing. If you have doubts, maybe think about what else you could do. Let's see. How do you make your webcam window like a Serenity window? Yeah, so this answer here is correct. It's just an OBS scene configuration. I have OBS set up so that this here is just a picture that I put in the screen. Let's see. Kyle says, what is the trade-off between defining a function inline versus out of line? So the trade-off, okay, let's talk about that quickly. So inline functions by necessity are literally, or not, actually, let me back up. Out-of-line functions are guaranteed to be out of line. They're not going to get inlined at the call sites, and that means that in order to call an out-of-line function, you have to emit a call instruction, you have to spill your registers and stuff like that. And you also can't integrate any knowledge that you might have about various state at the call site into the callee, whereas inline functions, they don't require call instruction, and they might be able to use additional context from the call site in order to do better optimization and stuff like that. Very often, for example, in Serenity, stuff that gets inlined would have assertions in it, but because the compiler can discover from the context at the call site that, hey, this assertion will never ever hit because we checked the condition earlier, then it's able to optimize out those assertions. So that's really nice. But the trade-off, of course, with inline code is that it normally ends up taking more space because you have to expand the code at the call site instead of just having a single location where the code lives. But there are exceptions to that as well. I feel like I wrote something about. Yeah, right. I wrote a bit about inlining on my blog a while ago about smarter C++ inlining. Definitely something to check out if you're interested. It actually has the pros and cons of inlining listed right here. So check that out. Anyway. So let's see. Echo-Optic says, would you accept PRs in other languages than CPP? No. Okay, and let's see. Oh, wait, shoot. It's 6 p.m. and I have to actually leave. So let's take one last question, and then I gotta go. So Kongdang says, can you explain a little bit about what's it like to write a device driver for SerenityOS? So it really depends on what type of hardware you're writing a device driver for. So if you are writing for a network card, for example, it's reasonably straightforward because we already have like the network adapter class that I talked about that you just inherit from that, implement the virtuals as needed, and then you can get it working. But if it's for a type of device that we don't currently support at all, then you also have to figure out what kind of abstraction do we need to expose to user space so that it's able to interact with this device. Like, say, for example, that you wanted to support a webcam, right? What interface do we need for user space to get the picture from the webcam from the kernel? and you would have to build infrastructure to accommodate that, and probably make sure that it can support different types of webcams and so on. And like, how do you change the resolution of the webcam from user space? So there's a lot of sort of discovering what interfaces and abstractions are necessary. So depending on if what you want to make a driver for is already something that we support some type of, the work is very different. But if it's just about making a driver for a network card or some type of disk device or something like that, then the work is mostly about reading the spec for the hardware, and then sort of taking an existing driver and changing it so that it talks to your type of hardware instead. And then once you figure out how to make that work, you just clean it up and nice it up. And I think that's sort of what it's like. We don't do a lot of device drivers. Maybe we should try to do more. But whenever somebody wants to work on that, they can just do it. And I think Luke mentioned earlier here somewhere, I lost it, that he had a PCNet, I think. Was it PCNet? Yeah, Luke was saying he had a work in progress PCNet driver in his fork. Yeah. So, yeah. I guess that's my answer to that. Anyways, I gotta go. So thank you everybody for coming to office hours. I hope that we were able to cover some interesting topics, and I want to really, really thank everybody for all the super chats and for the interesting questions and for the great Friday afternoon vibes. I really appreciate the company and the excellent start to the weekend that we have here. So I hope everybody will have a great weekend and a great evening or a morning, whatever it is where you are. And I will see you all next time. So, bye-bye.